As as in many areas, the clear knowledge of one goal is half the time faith. That's outstanding. Um,
Okay, so we're gonna get started. There's a few people here. So basically, the very first week we went over a few sources, discussing sort of the difficult nature of Kohelet, just in terms of its content. There are aspects of it that seem to border on the heretical. It's a very sort of, at times, very negative oriented work, and there are contradictions, and there were all kinds of debates among the Chazal whether or not it should even be included in the Bible. And in the end, it is included. It's we conclude that the beginning of it deals with Torah, and the end of it deals with Torah, and that redeems a lot of what is maybe troublesome about it. And that was essentially the first week. Last week we started the first chapter, so we're going to briefly review sort of the first two sections of the first chapter, and then we'll go more in depth for the last two sections of the first chapter. So it starts out, Divrei Koheles, right, who is the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Traditionally, we assume that this is Solomon, King Solomon, who was son of David and king in Jerusalem, and is regarded by our tradition as the wisest person. Um, and we saw that he remarks that everything is futile, everything is. We said about Hevel last week that Hevel is sort of from the same root as like to take a breath or air. So it's very fleeting, right? In the same way that a breath dissipates immediately once you exhale, so too is this world, right? Generations come, generations go. I heard some talking about it over here. One question that I meant to ask folks last week, how many of us know who our great grandparents were? It doesn't take too many generations before you might only know a name, you might not even know that, right? It's amazing how quick a generation passes and we have no sense of who that previous generation was, right? And we saw that all rivers flow to the sea, but even so, the sea doesn't fill up, and the sun rises and the sun sets. Title of Ernest Hemingway novel. He got it from here. And There's sort of too much to take in. Everything becomes overwhelming. The eye never stops seeing, the ear never stops hearing, and there's nothing new basically under the sun. So the main takeaway that I had from this section of the chapter is that he's setting up a tension here. He's setting up a tension, and the tension is best expressed really at the very beginning, right? In verse 3, it says, "Ma yisron la'adam b'chol amolo esher ya'amol tachas hashamesh," right? What gain is there to a person for all of the work that they're involved with under the sun, right? People are plugging away at their 9 to 5s and they bring home the paycheck. But at the end of the day, what do you have? What lasting impact does that ultimately have? And he says, why does he come to that conclusion? Because generations pass, and because the sea, tide goes in, tide goes out, rivers flow, like the world, everything keeps turning, everything keeps moving, and that dwarfs the impact of our individual work. So what I'd like to posit, and what I think we came away with last week, is that this first section here is really setting up a tension between, essentially between time and the individual, right? Individuals, humankind, right? Generations, they repeat, so humanity has a certain longevity. Humanity does have a certain legacy. I think we hope that humankind is eternal as well, in the same way that the rivers and the seas are. We'll see, we have yet to find out. But an individual really doesn't, right? An individual has their allotted time on this planet, and then after that, on some level, that's it, right? Again, we do believe that there's something greater and something beyond, but on a very tangible level, we have a very short time here, and once that's passed, it's passed. So what's the point? is the tone of this first part. Any thoughts or questions on that so far?
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Well, it's another day, older and deeper in debt, but.
Yeah, okay, good.
The whole point
Good.
of Judaism, I thought, well, one of the main tenets is that Hashem wants us to work and be useful. And this contradicts, and yet there's another contradiction right at the beginning. Why should we work? But why should we have so much pleasure? But can we have a lot of pleasure when we work?
Okay.
Yeah, there is pleasure in work.
Okay.
That's not the conclusion.
Right,
They're
you're right.
juxtaposed, it's all separate, isn't, there's no like continuum, yeah.
Okay, good.
I don't know why this guy has to like say, denigrate the fact work is is basic to our lives.
Okay,
So
good.
why bring that up? Because time passes, that's a way to mark time.
What's a way to mark time?
Yeah, working and then Shabbos, I mean, the whole
Okay,
religion is
okay.
based on working and not working,
Okay,
right?
good,
So.
good. So he asks,
What if we didn't
he
work?
asks a very troubling question. He asks, at the end of the day, what does that help? Do we hear why he's coming to that conclusion,
Because
I
he's
guess?
depressed,
Okay,
he's obviously
Okay.
depressed.
okay.
I
Good.
think Yitron is really key to understanding the whole book, and because I think it has a very specific meaning. It means that there's no surplus. It's like you can't take it with you. Everything that you do is in life. So people always search for something that they can retain permanently, or is a special mark, status or this or that. But he's really saying there's no Yitron. Everything is here. Whatever the balance sheet, and this word is taken from commerce. The balance sheet has to balance or is in balance. And there's no surplus. There's no something that's additional beyond life in the sense that you go with, that you can take with you. But I don't think you have to read that as a despairing comment. He's just saying like, that's not human life, that you have a yitron, that you have something that you retain forever or after, or life ends, etc. And I do want to share, I think, a very famous Jewish joke that I think says it very well. Two Jews are talking and one says, how was the wedding? And the guy says, "Oh, it was just ghastly. It was one of the worst weddings I ever attended." He says, "What happened?" He says, "Well, the food was terrible, and the portions were so small."
Right.
So it's in here. That's in here.
Good. Yeah, and I do want to say, I want to say two things in response to that.
Stupid.
I want to say two things is that if we understand Hevel as fleeting in the way that a breath is fleeting, rather than like a moral judgment of like, oh, it's pointless. If we understand it as fleeting, then I think that's very true, right? You can't take anything with you. You're right. In our day-to-day, the work that we do, it matters, right? It
Very much
impacts
so. We grow
us.
We're eating.
We're eating, right?
Well,
It helps us to
there's
survive.
generations.
Good, beautiful, right? Exactly. It does matter. Our work does matter.
Of course it
You know,
does.
you can count it in your bank account if you want to, right? That has practical ramifications also. But you can't take any of it with you. And once
Why would you want to?
I don't know.
Well,
Some
I
people
guess-
want to.
That what I'm hearing
Yeah.
is that some people, one could go through life looking for accumulating a lot of things, right? And if you get wrapped up in the day-to-day activity and you think, I need more, I need more, and I need more. And I never really thought of it this way, but now that we're talking about it, the answer is not about more. In the end, we're all, it's a zero-sum game.
Mhm.
So then that gives us perspective about what we're spending our time on when we're here. Perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's that Wall Street saying, "He who dies with the most toys wins." I mean, people, that really was a indicator of that culture.
Sure. They didn't read Kohelet.
Too busy working.
Too busy working. Too busy working. The other piece that I'll add to this, that's a nice little religious piece, is that I think your question, Leslie, I think is a lot of where the Chazal have their problems with this. They point out that they take issue with this very verse, that like, what do you mean, what gain do you have from your work? Their issue is that you would make the mistake that like even the Torah that you learn doesn't matter. And
Oh,
they end
boy.
up,
Oh,
so,
yeah,
okay,
yeah,
okay,
yeah, yeah.
so fine, so
Always,
we're coming, fine,
yeah.
good, we're coming with our perspectives, but I'll throw in a little chazal. I'm a rabbi for a reason.
That's right, you're here for a reason.
That's
You know,
right.
So the chazal make a drasha, right? They make an inference off of this verse, right? What worth, what value, what gain do you get from the work you do under the sun, meaning during the day? What are you doing during the day? You're at your job 9 to 5.
Mhm.
But what about the stuff that's not done during the day, meaning the Torah that you learn when you get up before dawn to learn Torah, or when you're learning before you go to bed? That there is a gain. And that you can take with you, by the way. So that's a plug for Chazal's understanding of this verse. But I think everything we're saying is good. But again, Tachas Hashemesh, the Chazal in a number of places, they assume that Tachas Hashemesh means specifically worldly pursuits, as opposed to spiritual pursuits. Tachas Hashemesh denotes during the working day, so that's physical worldly pursuits, but of course for spiritual pursuits there is gain. So that's a more drashic understanding of these verses. So, good. So I'd like to now go to verse 12. And we're gonna finish the chapter. Verse 12, there's gonna be a switch over here. So it says verse 12, Ani Koheles, Ha'isi Melech al Yisrael b'Yerushalayim. He says, I am Koheles. I was the king over Israel in Jerusalem. V'nosati es libi lidrosh v'lasur b'chochma al kol asher na'aso tachas hashamoyim. Right, and I got it in my head to, or I decided to seek and to examine wisdom on everything that exists under the heavens. Hu inyan ra nasan Elohim livnei ha'adam la'anos bo. And it's a sorry lot that God gave to people to examine.
Oh,
That's okay. Right, it's a sorry, troubling thing that that God gave to us to understand, which I think he means here. Again, the translation says it's a sorry task that God has given to the sons of man with which to be concerned. I think he's referring to wisdom over here and understanding, wisdom and understanding of the world. When you start getting involved in understanding the world around you, says Koheles, it's really not such a nice thing. Ra'isias kol hamaasim shenasu tachas hashamesh, right? I've seen all of the actions that people do under the sun. V'hine hakol hevel, u'r'us ruach, right? Everything is fleeting and is embittering to the soul, or they say vexation of the soul. Me'uvos lo yuchal liskon, a crooked thing cannot be made straight. V'chesron lo yuchal lihimanos, and something that isn't there can't be counted. Now I'll say something interesting that I saw between translations. Art Scroll sort of translates this idea: a crooked thing can't be made straight, and a loss can't be counted. It sort of presents that like an independent thought. But the way that the JPS translates it, it's a description of everything we just said. Right? He said, I am Koheles, I was the king over Jerusalem, and I decided to take a look at wisdom. And I found that wasn't so good either. It's a crooked thing that can't be made straight, and it's a missing thing that can't be counted.
Wisdom.
Wisdom, yeah, I think so. Again, maybe not wisdom as much as what wisdom gives you, like the insight that wisdom gives you, but yes.
maybe it means that everyone has a different perspective. There's no truth.
Okay.
There's no
Okay,
absolute
okay.
truth. If I'm just
Okay.
taking your wisdom thing further,
Yeah.
because wisdom itself is fabulous.
Well, that's the thing. I'm happy you said wisdom is fabulous, because I think we generally assume that. And I think
Yeah.
we live lots of our lives that way. Hold on to that. Let's just get the chapter under our belt and let's come back to that. Dibarti ani im libi lemor, right? I spoke to my mind, I spoke to my heart, saying, Ani hine higdalti v'osafti chochma al kol asher haya lefonai al Yerushalayim. V'libi ra harbe chochma v'das, right? He said, I grew up and I gathered all kinds of wisdom about everything that was in front of me, everything in Jerusalem, and my mind or my heart saw a lot of wisdom and knowledge. And I also decided to examine wisdom and knowledge as well as folly and madness. Yodati shigam zeh hu rayon ruach. And I saw that's also That's also a vexation of the spirit, they say. Kivirov chokhmah, because with a lot of wisdom, rav koas. There's a lot of, right? This I heard you guys saying also, right? Art Scroll says grief. I also kaas is usually anger, right? With a lot of wisdom, comes a lot of anger. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, good call, good pull. The Yosef Da'as, and one who increases knowledge, Yosef Machov, increases pain, increases discomfort, pain. So yeah, I'm gonna ask an insanely broad question. What do we make of this? What do we make of this so far? So I think we mentioned, right? Wisdom we usually think of as a good thing. Knowledge we really think of as a good thing, right? Jews are into wisdom and knowledge, right? That's something that we're generally into pursuing. Sometimes too much. So
We're known for that.
we're known for that. Yeah, we're known for that.
Kohelet is saying the opposite. He's saying that the wisdom is the knowledge of the terrible truths, and that of sickness and death, and watching others die. And he's saying, like, this is trying to figure it out. You know, we think it's a very modern thing, you know, existentialism, trying to figure it out. But Kohelet is saying that this is the biggest, most painful thing of all, is the confusion of life, of trying to, you know, figure out. And even someone who, you know, Kohelet makes it clear that he has this, you know, esteemed place, fabulous riches, it's almost a parody of wealth in the next chapter, and this amazing status as king and seer, and he says, no, like, the horrible thing is that I too have to find my equilibrium and find my understanding of life. And I have to say, Rav, the one thing I'm interested in is when he talks about how he seeks madness and folly. That I've always puzzled over. Like, where was he going? What was he really saying? Was he talking about some kind of like drunken ecstasy that had, like, obliterating your mind was also one of the directions that he looked? I think that might be true, but I throw that over to you for your opinion.
Yeah, I like that question. To repeat the question, what does it mean, right? We sort of have a good understanding. What does it mean to examine wisdom, right? That usually means, like, A, what is wisdom? And B, like, okay, let me go learn, right? Like, to examine wisdom, you ask wise people, you read good books, you accumulate wisdom. But to examine wisdom and then to also examine, like, madness, right? How do you do that? You know, how do you examine madness? You know, what it brings to mind for me is accumulating broad perspective, right? I think he is trying to on a certain level, if you know what madness is, maybe you can empathize better with those who are suffering from it. Also, if you know what madness is, you know what to avoid. You know, there is a lot potentially to be gained from engaging with the opposite of wisdom as well, right? What wisdom is complete if you don't also know what the opposite of that wisdom is?
The opposite of witness is madness?
Okay, good. Also a good, you don't think so? Okay.
What is the Hebrew word? It's
So we've got 4 Hebrew words. We've got 4 important Hebrew words over here.
Chachma,
Chachma,
Das,
exactly. So that's wisdom and knowledge, maybe.
right?
And then we have holelus or holelos, he says, and sichlus,
Right.
which are a little harder to translate. Art Scroll says madness and folly. JPS says also madness and folly.
Is Seichel and Siflus?
They're definitely related. They've got to be related. Seichel, we usually say, is a good thing. Seichel is usually an understanding. Sichlus somehow becomes the opposite of that. Noted, but not sure where that switch comes up.
I like the idea that, you know, the author pursued all these interests.
Okay.
So, you know, like, I tried one, I tried the other.
Yeah,
It comes up again, right?
Yeah, a little bit the buffet of knowledge, the buffet of life a little bit, right? I'm gonna try this, I'm gonna try that. Which actually brings me to what I think this part of the chapter is doing. First of all, what happened over here to the language? Yeah, exactly, right. There's a very surprising kind of shift that we're not used to in the Bible at all. But it shifts all of a sudden. I mean, in the prophets, you see it, but it was telling us a story at first. It was saying he was lamenting about the world at first, and now he's saying, I, Kohelet, here's what I did. Right. So I think the first part of the chapter really was setting us up for this tension between the fleetingness of being an individual human being in a world that seems to just turn and go on forever. And now I think he's coming to tell us sort of his agenda, his plan. He says, you know what, I decided I need to know what's going on in this world. And so I started examining wisdom, and I started examining, madness. So I think that's a shift here in the narrative that's going to set us up for the rest of the book, I think.
Well, it seems like it's his personal journey. He goes out to find. He goes on this trip, if you will. There's a parallel, in Buddhism when Siddhartha leaves the palace where he's never seen suffering, and he goes out to see the world, and he's transformed by his journey into the world. Kohelet does the same thing. He goes out, and a lot of these things that he speaks, so even if he's speaking somewhat abstractly, he says, I went on and did this. I got all these horses. I had all these courtesans. I mean, he's saying, like, this is what I did. I got vineyards. It's like the adolescent who leaves home to find his identity and literally goes on a journey. And it's very personal, and he leaves abstractions behind. And it seems like, quote, he's done all these things.
Good. Right. There's a little bit of a take it from me attitude of it as well, of just like, I did these things. Listen to me. I tried this out. But also Siddhartha, what happened to Siddhartha when he left his palace?
He finally renounces the world. I mean, he renounces the world. He finds that it's unbearable to live in the world. And he sits under the banyan tree 7 years, whatever it is, and he literally becomes something that in certain sense is no longer human.
So he finds a way to make peace with it. He finds a way to make peace with it, but he steps out of the palace and he sees this guy's starving and that guy's, stealing, and this world is really a pretty wretched place. I think that's another example of the ways that wisdom, even though wisdom is this wonderful, useful, important thing, more wisdom, when you figure out what's going on in the world around you, sometimes it's really pretty discouraging. I think especially, I don't know, I'm feeling, as I get older, I feel that more and more. Again, it's the old phrase, you learn how the sausage gets made, right? That's what I think. You never heard that? Yeah. So the basic meaning, you're right. When you learn how the sausage gets made, you'll never eat sausage again, because you see they're grinding up all the bad meat and the fatty meat and the sawdust and whatever else that gets mixed in and turned into a hot dog, and you say, I don't know about that. So I think that's what he's saying when he says that with more wisdom and knowledge, there's more vexation and more frustration, more anger even. I don't know. What do you guys think about anger versus what do they say? Art Scroll says, with much wisdom comes much grief. But I think there's a strong case to be made anger as well. Do people have opinions on that?
We were saying about, well, at least I was saying that a lot of this could be over where one is in life.
Okay.
The perspective at the time of being written was the wisdom brought chaos.
Okay.
But I wonder if that's meant to be eternal. I don't know.
Meaning in our day and age, maybe it's not anger that it brings about, maybe it's something else.
No, I think it's anger. I think it's right on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like anger as a
feel
translation
infinite.
better as well.
Yeah.
You can't change anything.
Yeah.
You get angrier and angrier.
Yeah.
And the older you get, the more invisible you get.
Yeah.
The less power you have. The youth is power, beauty.
Or grief. It's grief. But
Yeah, well, you're sad over losing your youth,
or
the way the world is. Of course.
there are times when wisdom brings joy.
Absolutely.
imagine.
I agree.
Sure, which is something that I think we are going to have to keep in mind, right? This is a very sort of he seems to take a very black and white approach to a lot of these things, because of course there's, I think even if we asked him, hey, should I decide to just be an ignoramus my whole life? I don't think he would say, yeah, you should do that. Right? Like there's clearly, he's writing a literary masterpiece that ends up in the, you know, #1 best-selling book of all of history. So like, he's no slouch, and he's no like, he's not forsaking all of this wisdom that he's gained, but he's got some very bitter things to say about it. So I think we always have to keep that in mind. You know, they say, you know, if anyone's familiar with like the thought of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, right, very popular, especially these days, Hasidic thinker, really fascinating character, but he has a whole lot to say about simple faith and don't depart from simple faith. Meanwhile, he's writing these very complex Kabbalistic and philosophical ideas. So, you know, and I think there's a real dialectic there. There's a real tension there to be navigated, because like you do lose out. You know, simple faith is an important thing that like the more you get into complex things, maybe the more you lose touch with it. But again, he's saying simple faith, simple faith, simple faith. Meanwhile, he's writing all kinds of intricate stuff. So I think we have to keep that in mind with Shlomo also.
I had a really good thought. I think
Yeah,
this is a
please.
really good thought.
Great.
We started out with, or at least in the beginning, we were talking about the accumulation of wealth.
Okay. Okay. Oh, okay.
And now we're talking about the accumulation of knowledge.
Good.
So maybe there's a parallel between the two.
I think that's great. I think that's,
So that
yeah.
there's this frustration, you know, of I want to get more money, or I want to get more things. But
Good.
there's an equal frustration, probably even a greater frustration
Beautiful.
for the pursuit of wisdom.
Good.
Because like Albert Einstein, the smarter you are, the more you know, you need to know.
Yeah.
Maybe that could be angles.
I think that's great. I think that's awesome. And I'll use Einstein. Einstein is unique because Einstein probably knew everything that he knew because he needed to, right? He was probably the type that just organically, like he had to pick up the book. He had to like take things apart. But then you have people that look at Einstein and they say, what do I want to be in life? I want to be the next Einstein. And then they go and they start
Right.
accumulating the wisdom. And now
That's
they're bringing it in the same way that others might be saying, you know, money. My vice is money. My vice is wisdom, you know?
Right.
I think that's very much what he's saying. We are coming towards the end, and we did get through the chapter. So that's good. So just to summarize, the first part of the chapter, I think, really sets up the tension between the individual, the fleetingness of an individual life versus the eternality of everything else, seemingly. And then the second part of the chapter really goes into this whole, I planned to examine all of these things, and that sets us up for the continuation. And so I'll say any last questions or thoughts before we finish out for the day?
Who are the sources that comment on Kohelet?
I'm trying to figure that out myself. It's a good question. Always Rashi. There's always Rashi.
There's Rashi, but there's a
you know.
Rashi on Kohelet.
For sure. Yeah. There's
Yeah.
Rashi on Kohelet. There's I think there's an Aramaic translation, which is always its own type of commentary. I think the Sforno, I think the Ramban, you know, I think a lot of the classical commentators on Bible, even Ezra, I think, I do believe they have also on Kohelet.
It says in the article, it says according to Ramban,
Yeah.
sermon on Kohelet. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's probably a heck of a work.
I have something to say that is depressing.
Okay. Okay.
The people that were close to me that killed themselves.
Sure.
I have several friends that did that.
Yeah.
The last guy you read about, because he was the first guy who jumped off this building, he's one of my best friends during the pandemic.
Sorry.
Me too, miss him, but anyway, he was always asking why.
Yeah.
He couldn't figure out why. I mean, the people
Okay.
that I know that were very pained
Yeah.
were always asking why. So I think this guy is also,
You think he's on a dangerous path?
yeah, why is this happening? Why?
Okay.
Why am I here? Always coming back to that, always.
Sure.
And never having an answer that's satisfying.
Well, I think skipping to the end is the whole, that at least the way I think about it is going to the end. Sof davar hakol nishma, eso Elohim yirah v'es mitzvosav shomer ki zeh kol ha'adam. So you know.
Well, that was the answer for him, but not for my friends.
I understand, but
Yeah.
we're part of the living. That's, and may it would be, I don't know, we're 120 years,
Amen.
right?
Amen.
So, I mean. That's why, right, isn't that what would be the reason why we consider this a holy book?
I think, yeah, I think that is one of the main reasons, for sure. And I will also say that I think as we go on, we might start to find where there are limits to what we can understand. We can always ask why, but we can't always understand why.
We can't
We just
accept
can't.
that, though. I mean, that's all.
It's hard to, for sure.
And then the pursuit of always looking to the answer why.
So you
is
can
madness.
feel
It
better.
makes you
Becomes its
angry.
own.
That's right, and makes you mad.
Yeah.
And makes you feel terrible.
So welcome to the
Yeah, like.
The
this is
most
my
emo
first
book of the
party, I say
Bible,
my
yeah.
first.
But thank you, folks. The big outro. Thank you. Oh, I believe the next 2 weeks, right? I believe the next 2 weeks we're not going to meet, and we're going to pick it back up on January. What is that?
8th?
January 8th. I believe
Okay.
that's the plan. We'll confirm via email, but.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
We're expecting all the answers.
Yes.